Ina mana, ina reo, ina iwi, I rau rangatira mai, nau mai, haere mai, piki mai, whakatau mai. So let's start our hui today with a karakia, and I'll pass over to my colleague Rochelle.
Kia ora, thanks Ronya. Tātou ahau rau karakia. Unihia te pō whiri marama. Te mokia te ao whātu tangata. Tātai ki runga, tātai te raro, tātai ahau rau. Haumie, huie, tākie. Kia ora and welcome everyone. Back to you, Ronya.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Kua tai mai nei ki tēnei hui huinga. Welcome everyone to our fourth and final hui of our summer series, He Raupapatanga o te Raumati. So our kaupapa o te rā is how to start delivering funded community services for government. Ko Ronya Ivers tōku ingoa, he kai whakahaere kaupapa ahau ki hui community Aotearoa. So my name is Ronya Ivers. I'm one of the project managers at Hui Community Aotearoa, and I'm really excited to be guiding our kōrero today. So te mea tuatahi, a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. We are recording this hui today and ask you to please remain on mute if you can. Please use the chat to make comments, post links, to post any pārtai or questions. We will have time for pārtai in the second half of our hui today, and we'll do our best to get through as many questions as we can. So we are finishing at 1 p.m, so it's an hour-long meeting. If you have your lunch, please feel free to have your lunch, keep your camera off if you like, and join us with your camera on when you're finished. We'll stick around for more informal kōrero and pārtai between 1 and 1:30. That's an opportunity to connect with us and each other, and that part is not recorded. So for now, kōrero mai, please share your name and your organisation and where you're tuning in from in the chat. We'd love to see who's joining us today. Inaine, I'd like to mihi to our speakers. Dr. Claire Ahmad is the Chief Executive at Social Service Providers Aotearoa. That is the peak body for social service providers. Kia ora, Claire. I really look forward to your kōrero, helping set the scene for us on this kaupapa today and giving us a community perspective to contracting for government. Karen Maguire is a Senior Procurement Specialist at New Zealand Government Procurement, which sits within MB. And Karen provides advice and support to government agencies on procurement and contracts. So kia ora, Karen. Thank you so much for joining us today. Both Claire and Karen will speak to us for about 10 minutes each, and after which we will move into a panel kōrero, and they'll be joined by Liz Davies for that conversation as well. So Liz is the General Manager at SociaLink, a regional body for social service providers in the Western Bay of Plenty. So kia ora koutou katoa. For those of you tuning in for the first time, ko wai mātou. Hui Community Aotearoa is a peak body for the tangata whenua community and voluntary sector in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We have a particular focus on supporting small to medium community groups, and we do this through hui, awhina and kōrero. So we're really about celebrating the sector's contribution to our communities. We advocate for its needs, we provide capacity and capability building like our session today, networking support, and we present the sector's interests with government and philanthropic sectors. So last year, as part of our spring webinar series, He Raupapatanga o te Koanga, we ran a couple of sessions on grant writing, grant funding and fundraising. So we're not talking about grant funding today, but government contracting. And that is part of that funding continuum where government agencies contract not-for-profits to deliver particular services in their communities. And there are many reasons why government agencies and not-for-profits would get into such contractual relationships. And there are possibly some reasons where that's not a good idea. And I hope that we'll get to talk about some of those motivations today. So our first kai kōrero is Claire. and we asked her really to start from the beginning and where some of the key messages for community organizations are that are looking to deliver funded services for government. What kind of contracts are we even talking about? And what do organizations need to have in place to be eligible to apply? So Claire, even before that, perhaps I could ask you to also tell us what brings you to this kaupapa today, some of the experience that you bring with us as well. So over to you, Claire.
Kyoto Ron, and thanks for that warm introduction. And tēnā tātou katoa, nā mihi nui, nā mihi mahana kia koutou I hui nei tēnei ahi I hurino I te motu o Aotearoa. Warm wishes to everyone who is joining the seminar this afternoon, the webinar. Really great to see you all and acknowledge that there is a wide range of rōpū of organisations represented today from a range of kaupapa I see, across health, across social services, environment, families, youth, older people. So I hope that it's going to lead us to a really rich discussion today. Ko wai o, ko Claire Matukongoa. As Ronya mentioned, I'm the Chief Executive of Social Services Aotearoa. My background is in international human rights law, policy and practice with a particular specialist focus on children and their rights. I've spent my career working across government, international NGOs and local NGOs, and also with Crown entities here in New Zealand, but my focus has always been on people. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. I really do believe that people are the most important thing, and so that's really what my background is all about. And in my role today at Social Service Providers Aotearoa, I have the privilege of representing around 200 amazing member organisations that are directly delivering social services to children, rangatahi, families and whānau all throughout Aotearoa. We act as a sector leader and champion for these organisations. We also provide policy and advocacy mahi, learning and development, and look for opportunities to tautoko and work across our sector with people like you and with Rochelle and Ronya at Huie in our shared commitment to building a stronger community sector in Aotearoa. So that's just by way of introduction. I'm going to now share my screen so that you can see my slides that I want to take us through today. There we go. So as Ronya mentioned, today I am going to focus on, setting the scene for our session this afternoon to focus on a community-based perspective on delivering government-funded services. And what I am going to go over really is going through, trying to take it from the start, as Ronya mentioned, and then I hope that during the kōrero that we'll have later on, if you've got any questions, I'm really happy to delve into any particular aspects that you might like me to. So in terms of kaupapa o te rā of what I'll share this afternoon, first of all, I'll start off with a bit of discussion around navigating the landscape when it comes to contracting with government. Touch briefly on the different funding types that are available, and I know that Karen will maybe delve into that a little bit more further. I really want to focus the bulk of my kōrero today on some key things that I suggest are important for you and your organisation to think about when you're considering delving into this world of partnering with government through contracts. And then I'll wrap up my kōrero by touching on a project that I'm involved in at the moment around the future of social sector commissioning, and just using this as a bit of an example of some of the current developments that are happening in this space, because it is really a changing landscape that we are working in right now. So navigating the landscape, the first thing that I want to share here is to acknowledge that the reality is that the government funding landscape is complex. So it would be lovely if there was one key place that I could kind of say, hey, check this place out and you'll learn everything that you need to know about government contracting. But that wonderful place does not exist right now. And I guess the complexity of the government funding landscape is characterised by a few different things that I'll touch on now. So first of all, acknowledging that the contracting space is essentially competitive in nature for the most part. So what that means is that if you are seeking to contract with government to provide services, you will be essentially in a competitive round or an open field where many others will also be, I guess, vying for that government funding to support the services that you're providing. However, there is a gradual shift that I'm observing to a more collaborative and joined up approach to government funding in some spaces. So positive signals there. And then there's also ways that we can seek to, despite the competitive nature of government funding, actually try and work in ways that are less competitive. And I'll come back to that a little bit further on in my kōrero today. The second thing that makes this landscape quite complex is that there are multiple funders. So when government funds currently, it does so through its different government agencies and the different budget votes that it gets in terms of the funding that it receives through each year's annual government budget. So what that means when you are a community-based organisation looking across this funding landscape, there's quite a range of different funding avenues and opportunities because of this multiplicity of the nature of government funders. So it means that there is I guess, quite a bit of navigating for you to do to actually work out where might you be best placed to be engaging with government and approaching this funding aspect. Then there are different levels of funding that government makes available. So for example, in our sector that I work in the social sector, for the most part, we still work on the basis of what we call contributory funding contracts. And so what that means is that government is really only funding part of the true cost of what it takes to deliver services. At the other end of the spectrum, there are arrangements which are more in the space of full funding. So that is where government is fully funding all the costs that are involved in providing a service. And in the social sector, we're seeing some pockets of change that are moving towards that full funding approach, but we've still got quite a long way to go before that is a more mainstreamed approach to funding. And I know that these different levels of funding also exist across different government funding spaces as well, depending on what it is, the kaupapa that you're working on. And then there are different requirements as well of funded or contracted organisations. So obviously, because when you are contracting to government, you are essentially, I guess, accountable for expenditure of public money. There are certain requirements that go along with that. And as I alluded to, there are multiple funders, but multiple funders also are taking different approaches to what the requirements are from the funded organisations that they are contracting. So you can expect that there may be some differences in what one government agency might require of you in terms of things like reporting on how you're using the money, for example, that may differ across different funders too. So all in all, it is quite a complex landscape to navigate. And I guess I just wanted to flag that up front and be quite realistic about it. Briefly then, there are different funding types, as Ronya already alluded to. So there are grants, which are more for one-off kind of projects, for example. Then there are specific funds that are sometimes made available from government as well. At the moment, for example, we have the Māori and Community COVID Recovery Fund, which, so when I'm meaning specific funds, they're often one-off or time-bound funds that are made available, but they may also be for a service provision. And then you have your more kind of formal or sort of fully blown contracts for service, is how I would put it. And this is where government is funding you and your organisation to deliver a specific service or a specific outcome that they want to see delivered. And then there can be different, I guess, levels within that as well around whether it's a one-year contract or a multi-year contract. These are things that can differentiate quite a bit across the government funding picture. So getting now to the main thing I want to focus on with the rest of my time, some key things that I encourage you to think about when you're thinking about delving into this world of potentially seeking some funding from government to deliver services. I really think it's important that you actually take this time to do some upfront thinking and work to consider, first of all, is this the right opportunity for you? I'll just go through now some of the things I would encourage you all to think about in this space. So the first one is to do your research. I think it's really important that you research into what are the different opportunities that are out there. I mentioned that there's no one special website where you can go to. However, on different government agency websites, they'll usually have a section that is around funding or contracting around relating to the services that they look to fund. So doing your research in the area that is relevant to you is really important. You can also get onto the mailing lists of various government agencies. That's often a way that they promote, if there is a particular fund or a funding round that's opening, they often promote those opportunities. So getting onto those mailing lists so you can keep on top of those things is important. Also understanding what the criteria might be for the kinds of organisations that different agencies fund is going to be key. So for example, in the social sector, you might be required to be social service accredited, which is a key criteria for government to fund you as a provider. Also do your research across both central government and local government funding opportunities. I think it's important to take a holistic view to what's out there. And then also look to really understand what are the aims or outcomes that the funder is looking to achieve. And ask others who might already be working in this space or who have already been funded as well, and try and learn from them. Secondly, think about your pre-existing relationships with government. So think, are there any strong relationships that you already have with central or local government? Talk with those key officials that you already know, explore with them what funding opportunities might exist for you, and also see if there's any sort of collaborative work that's going on at the regional or local level. More and more government is moving towards a locally led, centrally enabled way of working, so they are looking for new ways to work with local organisations at the local or regional level. So talk with them, and this really is about relationship building. Thirdly, think about who it is that you serve. Really get clear on that. Who is the population group that you are serving, and how does that form part of your uniqueness around what your organisation offers? Who you are having an impact on. Perhaps that is a specific population group, perhaps it's a much broader part of the population. Be really clear on who it is that you are serving, and then connected to that, the how, and the what. Know what your unique value add is as an organisation. Be really clear on what it is that is your specific focus through the mahi that you do. Be clear on what it is that you add, and also think about examples of the outcomes that you have already delivered. This is all great evidence to be able to include in a contract application, for example. And it really starts to get clear on what your credibility is to be a funded partner of government. Think here as well around how what you do aligns with the aims of local or central government that you're seeking funding from. And if there are key projects that you've done where you've been able to get feedback from the people or hapori who you have served through that project, if you can include that in your application or use it as an example when you're talking with government about potential funding, that is going to be really strengthening for your approach. And then finally, think about who you can partner with. So partnership and collaboration, as we all know, working across the community sector is a really key way of working, and government is always keen to see, you know, how you are taking a collaborative approach with your work. Think as well around other organisations that you might approach to see if you can collaborate and approach government together or apply together for funding. Think about working with others that have different strengths to what you bring to the table, and how a collaboration can actually mean that you'll be able to deliver better outcomes by working together. Even better if you're able to team up with another organisation that's already been funded by government, so that you can kind of build on that relationship and also learn from their experience as well. Last few slides here, because my time is coming to a close. So just briefly wanted to mention that things are changing in the government funding and contracting space. And an example of this is the Future of Social Sector Commissioning project. This was commissioned by the Minister for Social Development and Employment in 2018. She observed at the time that progress had been made in how government was contracting and funding community organisations, but there's much more to do. And so now we have a project that's ongoing that I sit on the project board with, but MSD is leading this project, and we are really positive about the direction of travel that this is going in. 6 principles for improved commissioning have been published, as you can see there on the left of the slide, which are really focused on I guess what whānau and communities need, grounded in te reti o Waitangi, and collaboration and sustainability of the social sector. So there is really this push to a new way of working. It is going to take some time. There's also some other examples where we see this starting to happen across government. So the Oranga Tamariki space, Te Aotearoa, the National Sexual Violence and Family Violence Prevention Strategy, and the health system transformation. These are all looking to have a more collaborative approach to commissioning and funding of work in the community space. And of course, through COVID, our community sector has shown what is possible and the huge impact that we are making every day. So we need to keep bringing that to the attention of government, and hopefully that will mean that over time we're seeing more funding coming into our sector to enable the great work that that we and that you are all doing. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
He mihi nui ki a koe, Claire, ki tō kōrero. Thank you, Claire, for your kōrero. Really great to have you give us a scene setting kōrero, which is really, really wonderful. So just a reminder to everybody, please pop your pātai in the chat if you have any specific pātai for Claire or for other speakers. We will have time for that later on. Mea rawa atu, we will now move to our next kai kōrero, Karen Maguire. Karen will give us insights into the flip side of the relationship that Claire just talked about, and the rules government agencies follow when they look for contractors. And Karen, I would like to ask you the same question too. Perhaps if you could start with letting us know what brings you to this kaupapa today as well. So over to you, Karen. Kei a koe te wā.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I will just try and share my screen before I start. Great. Okay, so ko Karen Maguire tōku ingoa. I work for New Zealand Government Procurement, and a big part of my role is actually advising government agencies and supporting government agencies to do best practice procurement. Now, hopefully my slides today, I only have 10 minutes, so I just need to take a record of the time. Hopefully my slides today will actually help you understand government procurement and contracts. Okay, so why we actually have something called the Government Procurement Rules, which is a big book. Why do we need rules? Well, basically because government agencies spend 52 billion per year on goods and services. What the rules do is they really just set standards of good practice for government agencies to follow. Some of the key rules for government agencies, I'm not sure whether you guys already know this, so you might be telling you how to suck eggs, but in case you don't, So one of the main rules is, and this, I'm talking about all types of contracts and not just social service contracts, and I'll try and tailor what I'm saying because I understand that a lot of you are social services or social sector organisations. So the main rule is we have to, if you're a government agency and you're spending over 100,000, you have to openly advertise that opportunity on GETS, which is the Government Electronic Tender Service. We do allow exemptions to open advertising in certain circumstances, and quite often you'll find in social services they may decide that it's competitive tendering is not the way to go because people who respond or the organisations like you won't respond to a tender, so they may do an opt-out or an exemption, and that needs to be signed off, rationalised and signed off by a senior manager. For spend under 100K, there's a lot more flexibility. So low value spend is what we call it, but agencies do have their own procurement policy to follow, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. In 2019, the rules were amended and broader outcomes became a really key focus for government agencies. Also, we redefined the value for money. So it's all about public value. Public value is now about obtaining good quality, good outcomes, which comes down to broader outcomes, and also good price. So what are broader outcomes? So agencies also have to consider when they're thinking about and planning their procurement, they have to actually consider what broader outcomes can be obtained to achieve public value. Broader outcomes are basically secondary benefits which can be obtained from the procurement. And it's things like social, economical, cultural benefits. So for example, if you're talking about a regional business and wanting to aid employment within the regions, it may be that one of the broader outcomes of the procurement spend may be that the organisation who does the work hires local people or local young people to do the work, so that a group of people who don't have good employment in that region are actually obtaining employment. But yeah, so broader outcomes can be environmental, social, economical, cultural. Cabinet was a bit more specific in 2019. They set 4 priority broader outcomes. And the main one probably for your organisation, social sector organisations, is the first priority is to increase New Zealand businesses' access to government procurement. And they actually specified what types of contract that applies to. So it applies to IT, but also any contract where Māori and Pacifica businesses can be involved. So that's quite an important one for you guys. The second one, increase the skill and size of the construction sector workforce, not as important. Improve conditions for workers is important. So making sure that everyone who's utilised within government services receive a decent wage and have a written contract and have good conditions in their employment. And the last one is support the transition to a net zero emissions economy. Okay, sometimes, as I said earlier, you can actually opt out of competitive tendering and do a direct source or something when you're spending over 100K, but the principles of government procurement always apply, even if the rules do not. And the principles, as you can see on screen, are plan and manage for great results, be fair to all suppliers to get the right supplier, get the best deal for everyone, and play by the rules. Okay, so low value contracts under 100K. So as Claire was saying, I took over to what she was saying, it's really about building relationships. So agencies have a lot more flexibility in how they award lower value contracts. And quite often what they do is they'll direct source to a known provider. They might ask for a quote to 3 or less providers, or they may even ask the client who they trust. Recently, Ranga Tamariki, they asked youth who they in the region, who they actually trusted to deliver services to them, and they went with who the youth told them to use. So that's great. Okay, we also have another thing in government procurement called the progressive procurement policy, which sets a 5% target for contracts to be awarded to Māori businesses. So if you're a Māori business, you are in the limelight, and you could get, you will find that government agencies are very interested in working with you. And there's some tips on our website of how to get tender ready. I don't have a lot of time, but I know the slides. You can prepare. One of the things I would recommend you do is you connect with Amatai, who is like a third party, and they can help you get tender ready. Register on GETS. and then you can actually see which tenders are out there. And then at the deliver final stage, we really encourage you to share your Te Ao Māori views and encourage buyer agencies to learn and develop. Okay, so Te Puni Kokiri is one of the government agencies who's actually leading this work for Māori businesses. They can provide support to you, and if you need to contact them, their email is supplydiversity@tpk.govt.nz. and Amatai, kiora@amatai.nz. They are really good organisations to get in touch with if you are a Māori business and you're wanting to obtain government work. Okay. So just a few final things for tender tips. Actually, I want to go back to what Claire was saying with the social sector commissioning. We will find that there will be, over the next year, there will be a lot less competitive tendering going on, hopefully within the social services sector. You may find that agencies will do more exemptions to the rule, so there might not be tenders, but being actually tender ready is actually still a really good thing to do, and to get organised and have your good news stories, your case studies of how the work you do actually delivers really good outcomes is really important. So yeah, the first tender tip I'd say is ask questions when you hear about a contract. Ask questions, make sure you understand what's actually involved, what the government agency is really wanting to achieve. If you're not successful, always ask for feedback. That's the second really important tip. Government agencies have to give you a debrief, because we're here to encourage competition, and they have to explain to you why you weren't successful and give you some advice on what to do differently next time. And register with GETS is also another good thing to do. I know it is quite complicated, as Claire was saying, it can be quite a complicated process, but it is quite valuable in the sense that you can actually see what's happening, what government agencies are actually spending money on, and you may think in the future, you may be able to actually look at your organisation's priorities and think, well, can you deliver that service as well? So nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, he mihi nui ki a koe Karen, ki tō kōrero I tēnei rā. So thank you so much, Karen, for giving us insights into the government side of the contractual relationship. Really, really great to see both sides for our audience today. So what we will do now is move into a bit of a panel conversation. So this topic of government contracts is really new to me as well. So I am relying on your partai for this next session. So please pop them in the chat, or if you would like to ask them directly to one of our speakers, please raise your hand using the hand emoji at the bottom of your screen, and then you can unmute yourself to ask your partai. So Claire and Karen will now be joined by Liz, and I will ask Liz the same question that I have asked the others too. Liz, if you could also introduce yourself and tell us what brings you to this kaupapa today. And we will try and get us all nicely aligned on the screen, so you can see all four of us as well. So, kia ora.
Kia ora koutou, ko Liz Davies, tuku ingoa. I'm the General Manager of SociaLink. We're an umbrella organisation for the SociaLink community sector here in the Western Bay, and our whole kaupapa is about how to strengthen and empower community organisations. So certainly one of the things we hear frequently, and in fact we just recently undertook a needs assessment of kaupapa Māori providers, and funding comes up generally as the number one area organisations are needing support in, and whether that be government, philanthropic or other funding sources. So that's why we're here today and share some of the learnings that we hear from the community organisations we work with.
Great, thank you. So yeah, just to call out to everybody, pop your questions in the chat. I can kick us off with a question while we wait for everybody to warm up. And one of the questions that perhaps I alluded to really early on in my introduction was that government contracts is a great idea for some, but perhaps not a great idea for others. So really interested in your thoughts around when is a government contract a good idea and when it's not a good idea. Who would like to go first? Just unmute yourself and.
I can go first. I think it's really important that you're aligning your organisation's values with the government contract values. So if it speaks to you and it's something that you're passionate about, I think it's always a good idea.
Yeah, I would
be my advice.
And I'd really tautoko what Karen has said, because I think it's really important to keep a focus on, what are the outcomes that you're looking to create and engender out there in the community, and is there alignment with what a particular government agency is looking to fund at a particular time, because ultimately that is, hopefully going to lead to a good shared outcome to come to fruition. The other thing that I would say there is also to think about, I guess, some of the pros and cons that go along with engaging with government funding. So, for example, if we can think about government funding versus, for example, philanthropic funding, sometimes there are different things that go along with that, so different requirements. In some instances, I believe that you'll be more restricted, I guess, by government funding, simply because of the different requirements that government has, as I mentioned before, to account for that expenditure of public money. Philanthropy is often more looking to fund innovation or leading edge type work, and may be a better place to go if you're looking to, for example, pilot something new or try something new out. That could be another sort of area of funding that you might think about, what is it that we're looking to do here, and who might actually be best placed to fund it in this instance. The other thing, just briefly, is thinking about, how well set up your organisation is to service the requirements of a government contract. And here I'm talking about things like regular reporting, for example. Do you have the infrastructure and capability in place to be able to follow through on some of those things?
And I would tautoko both Claire and Karen on that. I've known organisations who've deliberately chosen not to get government funding because they see their community needs as not aligning with government priorities, or they just want that flexibility to be able to service the community needs. The other thing, I suppose, is that whether the funding, the price of the contract aligns with the price of delivering the service, because if it doesn't, I think it can add a lot of stress to an organisation. And I understand about 80% of organisations are already over-delivering on their KPIs, which can sometimes put stress on organisations.
Yes, great, thank you. That's really good points, really good points. All right, and next question. Given that we are a social service agency working in the health sector, there doesn't seem to be any funding pool which we fit into. Suggestions for accessing funding? Does anybody have an answer for that?
What are they delivering? What sorts of services are they? Sort of a little
and if you like to, you're welcome to unmute and ask your question and maybe clarify.
So I'm Annette, I'm with Insight Endometriosis. So we've been around since 1999, empowering women and the gender diverse with endometriosis. So we don't deliver anything clinical, so we don't align with Ministry of Health, and we kind of don't fit under social development or anything else either. So, I've been following GETS for years. There's never been any mention of endometriosis coming up in any of that. We'd jump on it if there was, but how do we create that space?
Really interesting question, Annette, and I think in terms of, you're right, and this goes back to what I was mentioning in my kōrero, I guess about the siloisation of funding in the government space. That government is set up right now in a way that means that it's not necessarily always that great about filling in those gaps or identifying where there are potential overlaps. And what I hear from you, the area of work that you operate in, is at that nexus of social sector and health sector. And you're absolutely right. That's an area that's not particularly well served at the moment. So that's something that a lot of our members are also working in that space, and something that we're advocating for better connections across those two sector spaces, including around funding. Because right now, as you say, your organisation is potentially falling through those gaps that exist. I don't have a particular answer for you on where you can go right now, but I'm happy to have a bit more of a think about that. Karen, maybe you have some thoughts?
No, that's a really tricky one, because I think it'll be about building relationships with, DHBs, maybe the clinicians in the DHBs or the private hospitals. They don't have government procurement rules to follow, so they might be more flexibility. But yeah, also thinking about who else would need your service. Maybe it's private individuals rather than government agencies. How else you can get funding would be
And
my
also,
advice.
Yeah, possibly philanthropics, because it's often the philanthropics that fill the gaps that government don't fund. And there are hundreds of them, so it's a matter of finding ones that would meet what you're wanting to deliver and that fit with their funding criteria.
If I can just speak to that, we're completely squeezed with criteria. We have had funding and we continue to have funding, but it's getting more and more limited. So to give you an idea, Tyndall want to support gender equity, but they specifically state that they won't cover it if you work in the health sector. And that's just an example. Lotteries have added health onto their low priority list. Local philanthropics just don't want to fund anything to do with health. They perceive it to be a government. Ministry should be funding it. Well, ministry doesn't fund it. And we're all going to collapse as a sector because there's just nobody that wants to fund it.
It is very difficult.
And it seems like there's some others on the Zoom too that kind of fall within the gap of perhaps two agencies' responsibilities. Danica mentioned something too around menstrual equity, and that they're running successful programs nationwide. How do I engage with government to get funder support when I'm out of the normal lanes? So perhaps, hopefully, that's given some idea as well, Danica, to the answers. Possibly not a solution straight away, but I think one of the key points that all of our speakers have mentioned is around building relationships and trying to find ways that that those lead to whatever funding that you need. Another question that's come through: how long do organisations need to have been operating for to be eligible for government funding? Karen, can you speak to that?
Yeah, no, there isn't a minimum number of years, but I mean, the longer you've been working in the case studies and evidence you have about doing a good job, you'll have an advantage over someone who hasn't delivered before, but it shouldn't stop you delivering services from scratch either. So, but I think if you're well established and you've had some good outcomes, you have an advantage. But people have to start somewhere, so it's just getting in and getting some funding. Yeah. It depends. Sometimes they will have track record in a tender, so you have to look at the tender and see if track record is really important. But normally it's not just to a government agency; it may be to any community, like what you've done within your community. So you can use examples of work you've done, even if they're not government contract work. You should be able to use other examples.
And what about the size of an organisation? Is there a requirement or a criteria in terms of the size of organisations that can acquire contracts?
No, sometimes depending on what the service is, sometimes they'll want small organisations within the local community, and we're seeing there's more focus at the moment on local solutions by the local community. So I think over the next year or two, you'll see more of that. The smaller organisations will have a benefit. Or larger suppliers or providers can employ local people as well. So so it's also talking about looking at how you can network and partnership with other people within your community. So your offering is a bit bigger. If you think you're too small to deliver something, you could join up with with other providers and actually jointly collaborate and go to respond together, do a joint response.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Karen. Another general question from Charlotte. If there's not a tender on GETS or elsewhere, is there a way to approach government agencies to just ask about the possibilities? I guess it also comes down to having the relationship to know who you talk to.
Yes, and it's like maybe as simple as going to the MSD in your region and asking who do you talk to about this. Actually sending an email and saying, or ringing up and saying, who do I talk to? I want to. And corporate businesses do that very well. They do cold call a lot. So so I think maybe social sector organisations need to get a bit more proactive about that. But you don't have time. You're too busy doing real work in the communities. But just using your networks when you even talking to the local iwi, seeing what they hear about is really building your networks. To me is the key. But you can approach government agencies. There's nothing stopping you approaching them. At all.
From a practical perspective, and I really like, Karen, that you've alluded to the fact that our community-based organisations are really stretched. But I think if this is something that you're committed to kind of pursuing and trying to move into getting government funding, then it can be just about even putting aside, half an hour a week or 20 minutes a week to start with, where you just protect some time and say, that's the time where I'm going to try and, as you mentioned, Karen, just cold call XYZ agency and see if I can begin that process of getting through to the right person. It is, as I mentioned in the comments in the chat, it is just a process of persevering often to actually get through to the right person. But as I mentioned earlier, take a look at the various government agency websites. There's often a part of the website that is focused on funding and working with partners, and sometimes there's a sort of general email address there that you can contact through in the first instance.
Please utilise organisations like SociaLink. There's lots around the country. We have, for example, an organisational support advisor. So you'd contact them and they would help you get in touch with who the appropriate funders might be, help with applications. So that's exactly what we're here for. So please do find out if there's one in your area and please use us. That's what we're here for.
Quite often agencies will have hui when they're before, in the planning stage for tender, so they can understand who's actually out there within each community. So always go along to that and try and network with other people who turn up as well. It's a bit hard at the moment with COVID because we're all on Zoom, but even if it's on Zoom, it's still valuable. And hopefully in the next 6 months, we'll be able to do kanohi, kanohi face to face, and so you can actually turn up and hear about opportunities as they come up. Yeah, that's part of my role, is actually advising agencies to actually get out there and talk to people rather than sitting at their desk.
Thank you. And I guess that's a really good role that regional and national peak bodies in the community sector have, is in providing those kind of conversations in spaces and connections as well. So thanks, Liz, for mentioning that as well. And I know Mrs. PA probably has those functions too, Claire. Yeah. Thanks, Rebecca, for sharing that link on open data in the chat. We've talked a bit about or focused primarily on central government funding. What's the story with local government funding? Is that the same kind of process, or is it different? How do organisations go about that?
Well, maybe I can start on that one. We undertook some research a few years ago and met with over 200 social service providers and asked them about their funding sources. And interestingly, 9% said that they received local government funding. And I think that's largely because the funding of social and community services does lie with central government rather than with local government, and they have more money to pay for that. But as you know, local government have a responsibility for the full wellbeing, so they often do offer match funds, community grants that I know community organisations avail themselves of, and they could be really helpful in contributing to funding for the services you're delivering.
Yeah, local government does use GETS, very similar to a government agency. So because it's best practice, so they for anything over 100,000, they will normally go on GETS as well. Yeah, so yeah, and you just have to subscribe. If you're looking for work with your local council, you just need to subscribe to anything they put up, and then you'll be notified when it comes on GETS. The opportunities come on GETS.
Thank you. Thanks, Karen. And I posted something in the chat earlier saying that, Karen, you've shared a PDF with us that takes you through how to register for GETS. So we'll make that available to everybody as well. Thank you for doing that. We're running close to 1. I just wanted to check, are there any last questions from the audience? No? Any last comments from our speakers?
I noticed one of the questions is how long contracts last. And certainly I know an issue that some organisations have had is that often they're annual, but they're rolled over again and again, and sometimes for over 10 years. And unfortunately, there's no CPI attached when they roll them over. So in effect, they're being gradually defunded, yet having to deliver for the same to the same KPIs. So I think incredibly important where possible of government, if they do that rollover, can also incorporate CPI, particularly seen as we're seeing quite high inflation at the moment. So it's eroding the value of that contract.
Yes, and one of the things that they are doing in social sector commissioning is they are looking at more sustainable funding, because we do understand that currently contracts are too short. You don't have enough time to actually, they're too short and rolled over every year. So you need more certainty of funding. We do understand that. But the other thing is, if you're looking at a tender or even below 100,000, you don't think that it's priced properly, always go back to the agency and tell them what's missing, because they should be funding for the full service. You shouldn't be having to you need to make sure that you're covering all your costs for the full service, and they need to understand what those costs are. Sometimes it's just they don't understand, and they need to be told, really. So there's no point doing a contract if you're running at a loss. It needs to be,
So I totally agree, and I think maybe organisations need a bit of support about how do you price your services, so you can feed that back to the funders. Again, that's where your umbrella organisations potentially can help with that.
Yeah, and if they've got a pricing spreadsheet and there's stuff that isn't covered, put it into the spreadsheet and say, these are also costs that I will face and I need to be remunerated for, because they need to understand if they haven't included everything. And that's just before tendering. They should actually do it. They should have a good understanding what the true costs are.
And I see a comment about operational costs. Absolutely. So that should be incorporated in the price of a service, because they're probably your main costs often.
Thank you, everybody. It's been really, really great to listen to you. Noreira, that's all we have time for today. I want to thank our kai kōrero Claire, Karen and Liz for your generous time and contributions, and I hope that there'll be more conversations and opportunities going forward where we can continue these conversations. And as Claire and Liz also said, please utilize your umbrella organizations for connections and ask questions as well. I also want to thank our attendees, all of you, for participating and for your great partai. The words that I've taken away today, if I may share them, is research, be clear about your value add, relationships and partnerships really important, being aware of what government is trying to achieve, be tender ready, ask partai and ask for feedback, and register on Gets, and advocate for what you need. So those are just some words that I've taken away. And so this concludes our 2022 He Raupapatanga o Te Raumati summer webinar series. And you'll find our webinar recordings on our website under Sector Resources and Webinars. So please share them around. And also, if you want to receive updates from us on upcoming opportunities, we invite you to join our network as well. And lastly, also, please tell us how useful you found today's webinar. And Rochelle has just put a link in the chat. It's a 2-minute, hopefully less than 2 minutes, short feedback survey. We'd really love to hear your feedback. And I mentioned that also at the beginning, the next half an hour will be an opportunity for us to connect to you and for you to connect to us and each other. And it's not recorded, so we will officially close our meeting, and you're welcome to stay on the call for a little bit longer as well. So with that, I would like to ask Rochelle to close with a karakia.
Kia ora, thanks, Ronya. Karakia whakamotonga. Unahia ki te uru tapunui. Kia wātia, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te warua I te ara takata. Koia roe a rongo, whakairea ake ki runga. Kia tēnā, hui tāke.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.